When China's rocket was going up, we saw a bunch of white stuff falling down. At first, many people thought this would be just like what happens with some U.S. rockets, such as the Saturn V. But apparently, that's not the case. So what is that white stuff? And should the Chinese be concerned? Before we get to what this is,
3, 2, 1.
Generally, it's ice.
What's off of the Falcon 9?
And it cascades off the sides of the rocket. I've never seen an official estimate, but a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation suggests it was at least a couple of hundred pounds, 50 to 100 kilograms, of rock-hard ice. Before we get to what this is, let's first look at...
Most American rockets carry large amounts of cryogenic propellants, extremely cold liquids like oxygen, hydrogen, or methane. Liquid oxygen
as gas, but
minus
under certain
183
conditions, we can
C.
see it as liquid.
Liquid hydrogen
It is actually the
minus
temperature and the pressure
253
that
C.
determines whether
These
something will
temperatures
exist
are
as a gas,
so
a
extreme
solid,
that
or
they
a liquid.
instantly freeze
In the
moisture
atmospheric
from the
pressure
air
that we live in,
onto the
oxygen
rocket's
is a gas,
exterior.
but if
First,
we
look at what's
increase-
falling
As the rocket
off
sits
U.S.
on the launch
rockets.
pad,
Generally,
humidity
it's
condenses
ice.
on the outside
Most
of the vehicle
rockets carry
and
large
freezes
amounts of
solid,
liquid oxygen,
building up
and
as
some
white
also
frost
use
along
other
the
very
rocket's
cold
skin.
liquids like
When
hydrogen,
fully fueled,
methane,
the
or
Saturn
even
V
kerosene.
would become
They would
covered
only
in
grow
sheets
so
of ice,
thick before helping
like a
keep the
freezer
tanks cold
that
prior to
badly
launch.
needs defrosting.
As the rocket sits on the
That
launch
ice-trapped
pad,
air
humidity in
acted
the
as
air
natural
condenses on the
insulation,
outside of the vehicle and
sometimes
freezes.
building up to
You'll often
several
see white
hundred
frost
pounds
building up
of
along the
rock-hard
rocket's
frozen
skin.
water.
When
When the
fully
engines
fueled,
ignite,
the Saturn
there's
V would quickly
massive
become
vibration
covered
and
in
noise.
sheets of ice,
Really
like
vibration
a
in the
freezer
air
that
itself.
badly needs defrosting.
That shaking
And
knocks
just like
the
that,
ice and frost
freezer
loose,
ice, or
and
the
it
ice that
cascades off
forms
the
on a
sides of the
frozen
rocket
lake,
in dramatic
trapped a
fashion.
lot of air and acted
Most
as
of the
natural
time,
insulation.
This is completely
When
harmless,
the engines
since
ignite,
there's
there's a
nothing
lot of
directly
vibration
below
and
that could be
noise,
damaged.
which is really
The
vibration
ice
in the
doesn't
air.
have time to
That
accelerate
shaking
fast
knocks
enough to
the
cause
ice
real
and frost
damage
loose,
before the
and it
rocket
cascades
speeds
off
away.
the sides of the rocket.
It just
I've never
didn't
seen an
matter,
official estimate,
and it
but a
became a
quick back-of-the-envelope
characteristic part of
calculation
every launch,
suggests it was
a
at least a
signature
couple
visual
of
that
hundred
space fans
pounds,
came to
but there was
expect.
little for it to...
First of all,
Chinese
about
phone
30
reality
seconds before the
and
rocket
Chinese
was set to
rocket
lift off
launches,
at
what you're
7:10
seeing
a.m.
isn't
Hold,
ice
hold,
foam.
hold.
It's
Standing
thermal
down due to recovery
insulation
weather
foam.
conditions.
For Chinese launch
Launch orders
vehicles,
running.
especially the Long March Toucan 3 and 4 families, the white
The mission was
material is
scrubbed because of
protective
bad
foam,
weather out in the
or
booster
covering
recovery
applied
zone.
to the rocket
It happens.
to control
The launch will
temperatures
happen
and protect
another day.
sensitive systems.
hit other than the aluminum
Visually,
tail fins,
it appears
and
as
it didn't
white,
have time to get
irregular
moving fast
flakes
enough
or
to cause
sheets
any
that
real
seem to
damage.
rain downward.
It just didn't matter, and it became a characteristic part
they
of
aren't
every
being
launch.
thrown off. The
On
rocket is
Chinese rockets,
accelerating away
foam can
so
cover
fast
propellant
that
tanks,
once the pieces
feed lines,
detach, they're left
skirts,
behind,
interstage
tumbling
sections,
slowly at
umbilical
relatively
areas,
low
and
speed.
attachment points.
Why
During
foam instead of
liftoff,
ice?
staging, aerodynamic heating,
These
and
rockets
vibration,
use hypergolic
small chunks
propellants.
can break free.
So let's
Mainly
explain what these
unsymmetrical
white pieces
dimethylhydrazine
are and
and
why
nitrogen
this
tetroxide,
happens.
N2O4.
Welcome to the Dongfeng Hour.
While both are liquid,
Please make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened.
narrow margins.
我的飞行已经离开上海，我们预
When
That
China's
matters,
rocket was
because
going
many
up, we
Chinese
saw a
launch
bunch of
sites
white
are
stuff
far
falling
inland,
down.
where
At
temperatures
first,
can
many people
swing
thought this would be
wildly
just like what
between
happens
seasons
with some
and
U.S.
even between
rockets,
day and
such as the
night.
Saturn V.
Winter temperatures
But apparently,
can drop
that's
well
not
below
the case.
freezing, while
So what
summer
is that
temperatures
white
can
stuff?
climb
And should the
past
Chinese be
30°C.
concerned?
Without
Before we get to what this
insulation, the
is,
oxidizer could
let's
freeze
first look
in
at what's
cold
falling
weather.
off
If
U.S.
you lose,
rockets. Well, you
in hot
lose.
conditions.
So how long could it take
Even
China
smaller
to catch up
temperature shifts
to,
can
or
cause problems
even
for
surpass, a
valves,
company that
seals,
already
wiring,
dominates
and servo
reusable
systems?
rockets like
The
SpaceX?
foam insulation
SpaceX pulled
helps
off
keep
its
everything
first
within a
successful
safe
booster
operating
landing in
range
late
before
2015.
and during launch.
Does that automatically put them 10 years?
The engineering behind the foam. The insulation itself is usually spray-on or molded foam, similar to polyurethane or polyisocyanurate. While we often associate this kind of foam with cryogenic fuels like liquid oxygen or hydrogen, it's also used on non-cryogenic rockets to limit heat transfer, prevent condensation, and buffer against extreme ambient conditions. On Chinese rockets, foam can cover propellant tanks, feed lines, skirts, interstage sections, umbilical areas, and attachment points.
Here's what
During
happened.
liftoff,
The Hyperbola
staging,
1, a four-stage
aerodynamic
rocket,
heating, and
lifted off
vibration,
from the Juquan
small
Satellite
chunks
Launch Center
can
in the
break
Gobi
free.
Desert on its second
Insulation
flight. Shortly after liftoff, the rocket veered dramatically off course. An official confirmation of the failure came hours later.
While the rocket is on the
According
pad,
to an iSpace press
fairing
release,
is
the
actively
company spent
air-conditioned.
28 days
That
investigating the
conditioning
incident,
disconnects
completing fault location
shortly
diagnosis,
before launch.
fault simulation and
If a launch
prediction,
is scrubbed
test
at that
verification,
point,
and
insulation
improvement
provides
measures.
passive
Their
protection
conclusion,
until
a
ground
piece of
systems
foam
can be
insulation,
reconnected,
which was supposed to
helping
fall off
prevent rapid
harmlessly,
temperature
struck
changes.
one of the 4 grid
Not
fins at the
every
base of
white
the first
object you
stage.
see
When the
falling
foam eventually
is foam.
detached, it caused a
Sometimes
change
it's
in
a
the
thermal
angle of that
blanket,
grid
a
fin, which
protective
triggered a
cover,
rapid
or a
change in the
deliberately
rocket's attitude
jettisoned
and
shroud.
ultimately
A
led to the
good
breakup
visual
of the
clue
vehicle.
is how
For
it
context,
moves.
the Hyperbola 1 is
Insulation drifts
20.8
and
meters
tumbles
long,
lazily
weighs around
behind the
31
rocket,
metric tons at
while
liftoff,
structural
and has
components,
3
or
solid
planned
propellant stages,
separations,
topped
peel
with a
away
liquid
more
propellant
cleanly
4th
and
stage.
decisively.
The loss of the
China
Hyperbola
isn't the
1
only
mission
country using this
coincidentally
approach.
happened
You
18
can
years to
see
the day
similar foam
after the
panels on
Columbia
Ariane
disaster.
rockets from
Back
Europe
then,
and some
a
Indian
piece of
rockets
foam
as well.
insulation broke.
When
The
foam
space shuttle
becomes dangerous.
absolutely needed
But
that
sometimes
insulation
these
because
protective
ice could
panels
fall
cause
off and
serious
strike the
problems.
wings or tail
In
of the orbiter.
2021,
To prevent
Chinese
that, they
commercial
sprayed
launch
foam
company
insulation.
iSpace reported that an errant piece of foam insulation led to the loss of its Hyperbola 1 launch vehicle. The Hyperbola 1, a 4-stage rocket, lifted off from the Juquan Satellite Launch Center in the Gobi Desert on its second flight. Shortly after liftoff, the rocket veered dramatically off course. After 28 days investigating, iSpace concluded that a piece of foam insulation, which was supposed to fall off harmlessly, struck one of the 4 grid fins at the base of the first stage. When the foam eventually detached, it caused a change in the angle of that grid fin, which triggered a rapid change in the rocket's attitude and ultimately led to the breakup of the vehicle. This happened 18 years to the day after the Columbia disaster. Back then, a piece of foam insulation broke off from the space shuttle's external tank during launch.
Insulation over the
damaged a
huge
wing
external
of the
fuel
orbiter,
tank to
which
stop
later
ice from building
led
up,
to
because a
catastrophic
falling chunk of
during
ice could hit
re-entry,
something
killing all
important.
7 crew
Sadly,
members.
the foam
The space
insulation
shuttle
itself sometimes
absolutely
fell off
needed
under the
that
vibration,
insulation because
which
ice
is
could
exactly the
fall
kind
off
of
and
thing that
strike the
caused the
wings
Columbia
or tail of
disaster.
the orbiter.
One partial solution
To
for
prevent
this,
they sprayed foam insulation over the huge external fuel tank to stop ice from building up. Sadly, the foam insulation itself sometimes fell off under vibration, exactly the kind of thing that caused the Columbia disaster. These incidents prove that even lightweight debris traveling at incredible speeds can be deadly, capable of piercing
Perhaps one of the
metal
most
and
impressive
compromising
images is
critical
that of a
systems.
space shuttle lifting
The
off the launch
SpaceX
pad,
solution.
riding plumes of bright
One
orange
partial solution
flames.
for the ice problem
But more
is
than
when
just
SpaceX
providing
uses
an impressive
the
sight,
load and go
shuttle
strategy.
images play a critical
Fuel
role
is
in launch
pumped
safety.
into the rocket at the very last
Each
minute,
successful launch
minimizing the
depends
time
heavily on
during which
still
ice can
active-
build up.
Raptor 1.
But
Raptor
it
2.
also means
Go.
that if
Stage
there's a
1.
launch pad
Go.
hold of
Stage
more than
2.
a few
Go.
minutes,
Copy.
they
Go
have
for
to
flight.
drain all the fuel and wait
Clock
for
is
any
rolling.
frost to melt before trying
10,
again.
9,
SpaceX
8,
currently uses load
7,
and go for its satellite
6,
and cargo Dragon.
5,
Starting the fueling process for 35 minutes before
2,
liftoff.
1.
The approach works well
We have
because they
liftoff.
use after astronauts board the Crew Dragon on top of the rocket. At the time, Thomas Stafford, former astronaut and chair of NASA's International Space Station Advisory Committee, criticized the plan. He pointed out that it went against past NASA human spaceflight practices, where the launch vehicle was always fueled first. But look at them now. All Crew Dragon flights have gone off without trouble. SpaceX's Falcon 9 design also minimizes external insulation, so you don't see clouds of foam falling away during launch. The rocket uses different fuels and materials, and its structure is streamlined to keep everything attached. SpaceX's Starship goes even further, using stainless steel and internal cooling instead of external cooling.
This test has put Landspace out in front of a growing group of Chinese companies racing to develop reusable rocket technology, a key goal in China's expanding commercial space sector as it looks to compete globally and build itself into a strong aerospace nation. As China develops more and more reusable rockets, some of them even made from stainless steel, it's hard not to notice how familiar they look. So why do so many of these rockets resemble SpaceX designs? Short
3rd,
answer? It's just a really
Beijing-based
solid
Land
approach.
Space
A
launched
good
its
design
Zook
is a
3
good
rocket
design,
from
no
a
matter
remote
who's
desert
using
site
it.
in
Just look at
northwestern China.
SpaceX's workhorse,
The rocket
the Falcon
successfully
9.
reached orbit
To
on its
understand
very
why it's
first
so
flight,
influential, it
a
helps to
major
look at
milestone.
Falcon 9's track
The only
record.
hiccup
First
came
flown
during
in June
recovery. When
2010,
the first stage
it has
engine
completed
reignited
over
for landing,
500
an
orbital
anomaly
missions,
occurred
with
that
only
prevented
3
a
outright
soft
failures
touchdown.
and 1 partial failure.
Instead,
On
the
top of
booster
that,
crashed near the
hundreds
edge
of
the
Falcon
recovery
9
zone,
first-stage
resulting in a
boosters have
failed
successfully
recovery
landed,
test.
either on drone ships
Even
at sea
so,
or back at
the
the
fact
launch
that
site.
everything
That
else went
reusability has
smoothly on the
massively
debut
lowered
launch
launch
speaks
costs
volumes.
and boosted
This
SpaceX's
test
profit
put Land
margins.
Space out in front
Falcon
of a
9
growing
also
group of
keeps
Chinese
things
companies
relatively simple.
racing to
The
develop
reusable first
reusable rocket
stage uses
technology,
9 engines
a key
running on the
goal in
well-understood
China's
gas
expanding
generator
commercial space
cycle,
sector
while the
as it looks to
expendable
compete
second
globally.
stage uses a
As China develops
vacuum-optimized
more
version
reusable
of the same
rockets,
engine.
some made
It
from
burns a
stainless
familiar
steel,
fuel
it's
combo,
hard not to
rocket-grade
notice
kerosene,
how familiar they look.
RP1, and liquid
So why
oxygen
do
to
so
get the
many
job done.
resemble
The real
SpaceX
challenges
designs?
SpaceX had to
The short
solve
answer,
were autonomous booster
it's just a
landings
really solid
and protecting
approach.
the vehicle
A
during
good design
re-entry,
is a good
especially the
design,
engines and
no
grid
matter
fins.
who's using it.
Some of that groundwork
Why
came
Three,
from early.
designs converge.
2,
Look
1.
at SpaceX's workhorse, the Falcon 9.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9.
It has completed over 500 orbital missions with only 3 outright failures and 1 partial failure. Hundreds
Vehicles
of
pitching
Falcon 9
downrange.
stage boosters have successfully landed, either on drone ships
Stage 1 prop is nominal.
or back at the launch site. That reusability has massively lowered
Stage 1 entry
costs
startup.
and boosted SpaceX's profit margins. Falcon 9 keeps things relatively simple. The reusable first stage uses
Stage 1 is transonic.
on the well,
Stage 1 landing weird startup.
while the expendable second stage uses a vacuum optimizer.
Stage 1 landing leg deploying.
Burns a familiar fuel combo, rocket-grade kerosene, one, and liquid oxygen. The real challenges SpaceX had to solve were autonomous booster landings and protecting the vehicle during re-entry.
Falcon 9 has landed.
And grid fins. In short, Falcon 9 proved that you don't
SpaceX
need
figured
an overly
out durable
complex or
thermal
exotic
protection
design
that could
to
survive
achieve high
multiple
reliability
flights.
and
In short,
reusability.
Falcon
Since the
9
laws of
proved that
physics
you
are the
don't
same
need an
everywhere,
overly
it
complex
makes
or
sense that
exotic
others would
design
follow a
to
similar
achieve
path.
high reliability and
Then there's
reusability. Since the
Starship.
laws of physics
Unlike
are the
Falcon
same
9,
everywhere, it
it
makes
uses
sense that
methane
others would
fuel,
follow a similar
which burns
path.
much cleaner
Then
than
there's
kerosene.
Starship. Unlike
Kerosene
Falcon
leaves
9,
behind soot
it uses
that forces
methane fuel,
extensive
which
engine
burns much
refurbishment
cleaner than
between flights.
kerosene. Kerosene
Methane
leaves behind
combustion
soot
produces
that
almost
forces
no residue,
extensive engine
making
refurbishment
rapid,
between
frequent
flights,
reuse
while methane
far
combustion
more
produces
practical.
almost no
Exactly
residue.
what
That
Starship
makes
is
rapid,
designed for.
frequent reuse far more
SpaceX
practical.
also chose
Exactly what
stainless steel
Starship is designed
because it
for.
offers a great
SpaceX
balance
also
of
chose
low
stainless
cost,
steel because it
high
offers a
temperature
great
tolerance,
balance of
and
low
ease of
cost,
manufacturing,
high temperature
all key
tolerance,
for a
and
vehicle
ease of
meant to fly
manufacturing.
often.
All
So when
key
you
for a
see
vehicle
modern
meant to
Chinese
fly
rockets
often.
starting to resemble
So when you
Falcon
see
9,
modern Chinese
Starship,
rockets
or
starting
even
to
a mix of
resemble
both,
Falcon 9,
it's not
Starship,
surprising.
or even a mix
These
of
designs
both,
work.
it's not
And
that
when something works
surprising.
this well,
These designs
people tend to
work,
take
and when
notes.
something works this
The
well,
white debris
people tend to
falling
take
from
notes.
Chinese
Nonetheless,
rockets tells a
if China
fascinating
wants to
story about
seriously
engineering
compete with
trade-offs.
Western launch providers,
Older,
its
long-march
reusable rockets need to
use
be both
hypergolic
affordable
propellants
and
that
flying on a
require
regular
foam
basis.
insulation to
The
handle
good
extreme
news is that
temperature
China's
swings
launch
at
market is
inland launch
already
sites.
moving in that direction.
That foam
Around a
sometimes
dozen
breaks off
private
during
companies
launch,
are working on
usually
reusable
harmlessly,
rockets,
but
with
occasionally
plans
with
to fly a
dangerous
handful of times per
consequences,
year
as the
at
Hyperbola
first,
1
then
failure
scale up to
demonstrated.
monthly or even
Newer
weekly
Chinese
launches.
rockets are
With
evolving toward
SpaceX
cleaner
likely being the
designs
main
with
competitor,
integrated insulation,
consistency and
reusable
cost will be
structures, and
just as
advanced
important
materials
as
that
technical
eliminate
success.
external
Ahead?
foam shedding.
Not exactly,
This
but it's a
isn't
useful
coffee.
reference point if we
It's
put things
convergent
into
evolution.
perspective and focus
When
only
faced
on
with the same
landing.
physics,
SpaceX
the
didn't
same
get it right on the
economics,
first
and the
try.
same
They had
safety
2
requirements,
known landing
engineers
failures before
worldwide
succeeding.
arrive
Blue
at
Origin
similar
also had a
solutions.
failure before its first
If
success.
China wants to
In China's
seriously
case,
compete
there are
with
at least
Western
3
launch
separate
providers,
groups working on the
its
problem at the
reusable
same
rockets
time.
need to be
Land
both
Space has
affordable
already attempted a
and flying
Juche 3
on a regular
landing and
basis.
failed once.
The good
Space
news
Pioneer's Tianlong
that
3
China's
attempt
launch
is still
market is
pending.
already moving in that
CASC has
direction.
had 1 failed
Around
attempt
a
with Long March
dozen private
12A.
companies
That
are
already
working on
puts China
reusable
in a
rockets
very different
with plans
position
to
from
fly a
SpaceX,
handful of
which was
times per
essentially
year at
doing
first.
all of this alone
Then,
early on.
scale up to
If you look at it
monthly
purely
or
in
even
terms of
weekly
booster
launches,
re-entries before a
with
first
SpaceX
successful
likely
orbit,
being the
Land
main
Space is actually
competitor,
in a comparable position to where SpaceX once was. Land Space had an additional launch earlier this year, where the booster re-entered after a failure, which arguably puts them slightly ahead of where SpaceX was at the same stage. And if someone argues that SpaceX used Falcon 1 as a kind of indirect stepping stone toward landing Falcon 9, then the same argument could apply to China's earlier Chuche 1 and